Hey, solopreneurs. Today we have Danute Debney Shaw of Celefontis LLC. She is an author. She is an attorney. She's a facilitator. She's got a fantastic story. For her full bio, go ahead and check out the show notes. But what she's going to talk about today is how to make decisions from the inside. She's also got a book she's going to talk about, and I'm excited for you to hear this conversation. Danute, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I've loved listening to your podcasts. I think they're marvelous, and I'm very happy to be a guest.
That's great. Thanks for listening. I appreciate that. And we're always trying to get more listeners to our podcasts. But today you are going to share some great wisdoms on how to make, great decisions from the inside out. And you also have a book, and it's called How the Tin Man Found His Brain. And so we're going to touch on those two things today. But before we do that, I'd love to hear your story.
Well, my story is a bit unusual, and it's all brought out in the book, and I will probably refer to it at different points as well. My family is from Eastern Europe. My mother was in a Siberian labor camp. My dad was in a German labor camp. They ended up here in the United States, have been here for many years. They've passed away now. But my foundations were a little bit cosmopolitan, if you will. I was living here in the United States, raised here in the United States. I'm born here. I'm an American, but I had a lot of influence and perspective that extended beyond the reaches that I was surrounded by. And my family had a very, very broad approach to decision making. In fact, I mention it in one of my chapters when I go into some of the real life stories that have influenced my life and have taught me things and that I'm sharing, because I'm not speaking from the standpoint of someone who has consumed all knowledge and I'm now the expert. I'm simply bringing forward what I do in my work as well. It's a facilitation. It is the idea of expanding perceptual awareness, of enhancing decision making, and being able to absorb more information that you need to absorb to deal with the challenges and also to take advantage of the opportunities. And in these times now, when we are dealing with so much transition, so many changes, so many shifts for everyone, I don't care who you are and where you are being affected personally and professionally, and certainly solopreneurs are being affected strongly. And they need to be able to not only reach out for the kind of information that you and others provide, but also to be able to really work with it. And my goal has been a lifelong learning process on development, is to be able to assist people, to facilitate them in their process of achieving their best and most integrated capability to engage these kinds of efforts.
Very interesting. So, helping us make better decisions, helping us to, for lack of any other way to put it, be more intuitive with where we should be going with things. Is that a good way to put it?
Here's the thing, and this is core to the book. I believe in an entirely different paradigm than most of us work with. Now, as we will know from your introduction, I also am an attorney. I have a lot of background in management, organization, and law and facilitation. I've obviously spent a great deal of time with left brain efforts, using the mind, using the rational awareness, rational strategies. But I grew up, and that's where it ties in with my beginnings. I grew up with that understanding to value our insights, our subjective awareness, our emotional intelligence, our creativity. And one of the things that I work with in the book is the fact that when we come into the world, our parents do the very, very best that they can. But for the most part, they're trying to get us to integrate well in society, for us to be able to sit up, listen to teachers, get the job done, learn what we need to learn, get out there in the world, marry or not, get a job, get a home, build that personal empire, whatever that is. And that's the general goal for most parents. They want to help their children to become these successful people. Along the way, unfortunately, one of the big things that happens is we really learn to simply accept knowledge and information from the outside. Now, knowledge and information from the outside is incredibly valuable. It's where learning can take place. But we need to have that fertile internal territory which most of us do not. We've let a lot of that go. We're just taking in info. And that's why there's a problem with discernment these days as well. People have a hard time parsing things out because they don't trust themselves. They don't feel that they know how to deal with the material and the information. There's a guy out there, I don't know his name, he teaches the why, and to be very, very acute with your why. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this business? Why are you engaging in the financial decisions that you're making? Why? Very, very, very important. But also then comes the how you're going to go about that. And there is tremendous amount of subjectivity in the how. So here's the kicker. Here's the bottom line statement. My whole way of working, whether it's been in law or anywhere else, whether I've been providing consultations, whether I've been doing trainings and workshops, it's always from the inside out. It's by beginning with a strong sense of belief in your own subjective awareness, self trust. Starting with that, knowing that you're strong there, and then you bring in the rational, all the information, all the knowledge. And then you figure out what other tweaks need to be made. Is there a creative direction? And a lot of this all happens very, very naturally, very, very, in an unfoldment. It's not like, okay, all right, I'm going to sit down. Okay, let me be, wait, I'm being subjective. Wait, I'm being intuitive. No, most of us do a lot of this anyway. We do. The key is to do it consciously, to do it with conscious awareness that you're reading the picture first. Whatever that picture is, you're taking it in and then you are responding.
Okay. So I'm thinking, and I'm sure someone else is thinking, so how do we work on using that internal piece to gain that confidence? I mean, how do we do that?
Well, it's very interesting because, first of all, we all have to give ourselves a little credit. A lot of people think, okay, maybe I am creative. Other people are like, oh no, I'm not very creative. And they think they don't paint, they don't write books, they're not creative. We're all creative. All the time we have to be creative. Sometimes you have to be creative in the way you get to work in the morning because one way is blocked. You must come up with another way. Do you know, it's very funny. I've actually run into people who only know one way to go to work. It's really it amazes me sometimes. I mean, how can you only know one way to go to work? And if you don't have detour signs, then you're lost. And that's a great metaphor in life in general. So how do we do this? Well, one of the things is taking advantage of what we really have inside ourselves. Now, that takes a little exploring because, like I say, many of us don't think we're that creative, don't think we're that intuitive or that self aware. But there's more of that going on than we know. One way to begin is by being present. Now, we may have some of the things I'm going to bring up today. It doesn't mean people have never heard of any of this before. It's how you use it, it's how consciously you use it. That's where the power comes from because that's what you build upon. So, for example, if you're in a situation and now you're getting either distracted by things around the situation, or you're not really hearing what the other person is saying, you're not really listening, or there's something else going on for you, you have to continue to practice bringing yourself into the present, really into the present. People say, oh, yeah, I know that. No, no, no. Be surprised how many people are not present in a conversation, in an exchange, in a negotiation. They're dealing with a bank, they're only hearing certain things. Either they're hearing the problems coming across and that bing, 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 here comes panic, or they're just seeing everything in beautiful lights. That's not there either. Trust. Oh, yeah, this is an institution I should be trusting. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Is this person someone that you can trust? What's between the lines of what they're saying? So, by bringing yourself back, by pulling back, that's one of the things I say. Pull back a little inside. No one out here has to know what you're doing. See, that's the beauty of what I'm proposing. No one has to know what you're doing. No one has to know I'm being incredibly subjective. I'm being incredibly intuitive. I'm being instinctive. Wow. No one needs to know that. This is what you do calmly, quietly in a negotiation. Same thing. In a negotiation, very, very important. You have to stay present. You have to stay aware. When in doubt, you have to take a breath. And one of the very, very important things is response versus reaction. I'm going to give you a wild story that was in the news. And this doesn't have to do so much with entrepreneurship or a work. It has to do with somebody's subjective abilities. There was a incident some years ago. It was very well publicized, and every now and then when I bring this up in a talk, somebody will mention, "Oh, I've heard that. I've heard that story, or I saw it in the paper. I saw it on the news." I happened to be working in Washington, D.C. at the time. And this happened, I think, on like a Monday morning. Everybody was on a train track, the metro. They have the metro. The metro goes from outside the city into the city. If you're familiar at all with Washington, you know it goes out to Virginia, it goes out to Maryland, but it's essentially the core is in D.C. And it's generally a lot of commuters use it every day. So this was early on a workday morning, and at that point in time, the trains used to come in very fast. And this train was now coming in very quickly into the station. The station happened to be outdoors, and that's significant. In just a moment, you will know why. Train's coming in fast. A gentleman dressed in a suit, standing on the platform, pitches forward and falls flat on the tracks. Now, he did not hit the third rail. He just fell a little diagonally on two rails. Naturally, the platform erupts into near hysteria because what are you going to do? What are you going to do now? The train, you can see the train, it's getting very close. There's no time for like a couple guys to jump down, lift him up, and get him up on the platform. No time for that. One gentleman did really pretty much the only thing that could have been done at that point in time. He apparently was a mechanic of some kind. He didn't have engineering background, but he had mechanical background. Now, here's the process he went through. And the reason I know this and I can use it as an example is he was being interviewed on one of the television stations, and they actually let him say what he needed to say. Often they need these quick bites. And he says, the person being interviewed says two words and they jump to something next. Someone said, "What was going through your mind? What was going through your mind?" And he said, "Well, first of all, the weird thing was, I just knew I could save this man." Now that seems kind of irrational, right? No, it's irrational. It's just a thought that we have not seen the trail for. We have not seen the buildup to this thought. There's just a thought, an impression he's getting. He feels he can save this man. The next thought he had was very rational. He drew on his mechanical background, and he said, there's there's a carriage arc to the train, and there are stones here rather than concrete, so there's a depression. So he analyzed it very quickly. All this was in a split second. And he said, now came the creativity. He said, I'm a little guy, he's a little guy. If I pull him straight between two of the tracks and lie down on top of him, the train will roll over both of us and no one will be hurt. Now, when people saw him jump down, it seemed like a reaction. It seemed like, oh my God, this is happening. This train is coming. And this guy now jumps down. He actually already went through the whole process in his brain like this. He jumped down, pulled the guy straight, laid down, and just as he did, he could feel the train go over the top of his head. Of course, the train conductor probably thought she'd killed two people. But the train, of course, cleared the station. He got up, they picked up the other guy, and now that's not something I'm suggesting anybody try. I'm not giving this as an example because you should try doing this. But I'm using this as an example of this man's awareness, of this man's automatic trust in what he knew, and in his creativity in the situation. He didn't get killed, and he saved the other man without any injury. And he was able to do this. Now, let me give you one other very, very quick story in another direction, not as dramatic as this one. I like to tell this story because it is so dramatic, and people kind of remember it for that reason. That, okay, he got an impression, he reasoned it through, and then he came up with a creative solution and he went with it. And look at how it worked out. Now, that was very, very dramatic and rare. I'll give you another crazy train story. I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm sitting on a bench waiting for a train underground. The train comes. I grab my purse. I thought I had all my bags. I run to the train. I get on, and there's like 1001, 1002, 1000, the time period it takes for everybody to come before the door closes. Just as the doors are closing, a woman, businesswoman of some kind of creeps up to me and says, was that your bag over there? And I looked at her. I thought, oh my God, that's my computer. That's my computer. I left my computer on the bench. I thought I had grabbed everything. I didn't. And but she'd already seen it. She already knew it was there, but she was afraid to say anything. She was afraid to look stupid. She was afraid to make an embarrassing mistake. How embarrassing would it have been? I personally do not consider that kind of thing embarrassing. If I see something, I mention it to people. If they say, oh, no, no, that's nothing, well, fine, then it's nothing. She was afraid to say something to me when I could do something about it. Now the doors are closed, we're pulling out, and she kept saying over and over and over again, this is clearly an issue in her life. I should have said something. I should have said something. I should have said something. So that gives you the other, end of this kind of thing. A woman who sees something, has the perception, can take the action, doesn't do diddly squat about it, and then therefore is so I had to get off at the next stop. I did come back. Guess what? It was still there. It took 10 whole minutes to get back, but it was still there and I got it. But the truth is, yes, she could have just said something and saved the situation. So this is, this one's dramatic, one is kind of almost humorous, but they are illustrations of not really having the one is an illustration of having the trust, the confidence, the ability to kind of work through what needs to be done. And the other is the failure of that. And that happens in business, it happens in decision making, it happens in negotiations, it happens in our personal lives all the time.
So what you're saying is we need to trust ourselves a little bit more.
We do. We do. And how do we do that? It has to be something, it's a habit. It becomes a habit. And you play in small ways with it. You listen to yourself in small ways. This is not, I think I can fly. I'm going to go off the building. This is not the kind of thing I'm talking about. I'm not suggesting anyone put themselves in danger, whether it's of life, money, or anything else. You need to do it in small ways. And once you kind of build up that muscle, I'll give you another example. This is an example from this gentleman was a businessman for many years. He had his own business. He then decided to get a law degree. I met him when he was already an attorney, and he was a solo practitioner at the time, so it was just his own business. And he had told me that for many years in business, he would get these impressions, but they didn't connect with any kind of logical click of any kind. So he'd just dismiss them, just push them aside. And in reality, they always ended up meaning something in the end. It's like he had an impression, got a reading on a situation or whatever, and he ignored it. And the consequences weren't always great, but it was clear to him that there was a reason he was getting the impression, even if he didn't understand the reason. So I said, well, give me an example. Because he said, well, I'm really psychic. I said, oh, really? Really? He knew I was kind of interested in that sort of thing, like those kinds of perceptions. And I said, so give me an example. What are we talking about here? And he said, well, I'll give you an example. Two people come in. They've got their own business. Again, they're not solopreneurs. It's a couple. They own their own business. They have a contractor who they believe has breached the contract in some way. And they're talking to him about it. And he's taking notes, trying to determine what causes of action might apply in this situation as he's taking the facts down. And then suddenly gets this weird impression. This guy has done something that he's really messed up. He's really messed up in some way. She knows about it. And she's really angry and wants to absolutely hit him with it at some point in time. She's waiting for the moment. Now, this is a completely, what sense does this have to do with anything? And I said to him, well, is that really what was going on? He said, I don't know and I don't care. This is my own way, my psyche, my perceptual awareness speaking to me. And it uses its own metaphors. This is showing me I must pay attention. Because first of all, what if there is something going on? He doesn't care what it is that's going on. What if there is something that's going to divide them? What if this goes to court and she throws him under the bus? What if this ends up being a divorce? And this now the case becomes a property of the divorce. And so then his money is all tied up with all of this. So what he does is then watches for what other signals might show up. He's not going to say, okay, out the door. I don't want you two here. I know you're a problem. I'm going to throw you out. No. So he uses the information. It's his own little shorthand way of getting insight or getting impressions. And I said to him, well, was there body language? Was they giving it away with body language? He said, no, they were finishing each other's sentences. They were, leaning in toward one another when they talked. There was really no indication. And this was a completely non-rational thing that came into his mind. But he said he never ignores it. Sometimes it doesn't become much of anything, but it's worth noting and putting on the side. You just put it on the side. Keep it mindful. And he is extremely successful man, extremely. And then he ended up building, he did build his business and his practice again. And that's what he was, that's the way he wanted to scale it. With a lot of solopreneurs, that's where they want to stay. He moved himself beyond that and, came up with a whole practice and did some other work. But he always used that intuitive process in addition to everything else.
I call those the whispers.
The whispers?
I call those the whispers.
The whispers, yes,
I get those every now and then.
of course, yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm curious what did he just said he just felt like he had an intuition or he just felt like a feeling or
Oh, he doesn't even care. See, he doesn't worry about categorizing it. But see, here's the thing. You talk about getting this here and there, you'll get it, and it'll be something significant. The key to what I proselytize, for want of a better word, is this notion of owning it consciously. And people say sometimes things to me like, "Oh, gee, I don't want to have to think that much." Well, you're not thinking that much. Like the guy at the train. I mean, it looked like he was impulsively jumping down, but he'd actually already gone through a process and acknowledged within himself that he could do this. He knew he could do this because he'd figured it out very rationally, even down to the size of their bodies. But it happened very quickly. None of this stuff has to take a lot of time, but you have to learn to engage it consciously at the start of things. See, this goes back to what I was saying about school, and I talk about it in the book. I talk about those foundations that unless we've been in some form of counseling or some kind of self-examination, many of us don't stop and think about the fact that there's been a lot of shift and change in our lives as we've grown up. And some of these talents and skills that were very, very accessible to us as children have kind of been dampened and kind of been or and in some cases just completely shoved out the door. I'll tell you one other story about awakening in this respect. I was working in Washington and I was doing some consulting work. They I don't even remember who recommended this man to me. It was a phone consultation, unfortunately, only a half an hour. I bring it up in my book because it was just a startling thing. This gentleman called. He had a business that was his business that he owned. And he signed up to participate in one of these events that they often do in Arizona and other places. We were talking about the Southwest. There are often these spa destinations where there are a lot of conferences that are held. And this one was all about, maximizing. It had a lot to do with finance. It had a lot to do with engagement, interaction, et cetera, et cetera. But from a very rational, technical perspective. Well, so he spent a lot of money on this, and he's thinking, do you know they had a qigong master in the middle of all of this? A qigong master? See, and he's talking to me like this tough businessman. I didn't see him, but on the phone you can tell the guy who can be hard. He can be hard. And he's coming from that mindset. He's coming from that memory of himself and talking about that. A qigong master. And he was outraged because he's spending all this money. But he went. And something ridiculously amazing happened, if you want to look at it that way. It's like he was struck by lightning and fell off the horse. Suddenly, as he was listening to this man, and I only wish I knew what this lecture was about or what this demonstration was about, because he said, I can't really look at my business the same way anymore. I can't look at my wife. He's now seeing his wife as this gorgeous woman who's basically just sort of arm candy, if you will. Excuse me, choking here. Arm candy, and isn't really. There isn't much substance to her. She's a nice person, all that, and a great hostess, but who is she? What is she? Where is she? And the kids. He's got teenagers. These kids, they just want money. Dad is an open wallet to them. And he's just and all of this came at once. Now, most of us should not have that kind of download. It was downright traumatic for him. I'm not kidding you. And now he's talking to me almost in this kind of voice. And he says, do you think I'll ever be normal again? I said, well, I'm not a therapist, and I always make a big thing of that. I do decision strategy, and we work on strategizing directions that you want to go in based on what you want to achieve. But I don't work with the psychology. If you're saying to me, will I be able to unknow what I now know? I don't think that happens that way. And so the best that I could do was offer him, and I don't really know what list of books it was now, but I tried to pick people who were kind of expanded thinkers, people who sort of integrated a lot of their rational training and background with kind of bolder theories and philosophies. And because I thought that would be a good bridge for him, but he was lost. He was lost because it was too dramatic and too much. This is not what I recommend we all do. We do not need to be struck by lightning or have a horrible business crash, business failure to start to realize, what your investments were based or not based on, and should or shouldn't have been, and how you dealt with those, within your sphere of influence and work, whether it's clients or competitors. You shouldn't have to have that kind of smash happen. I mean, he still had the business, but now he wasn't even really sure how he wanted to run it anymore. He just realized that there were some real empty spaces in what he was doing. And yet he was doing things very rationally, according to certain theories, because he was applying them strictly. He wasn't using them with any kind of discernment, vision. And therefore, he wasn't building any resilience, because I got to tell you, this is what it's really all about in the end, is to have the resilience, because we are going to make mistakes. There's no guarantees that any approach is going to make it perfect for you. But you have to be able to appreciate your challenges, maximize your opportunities, and be able to build that resilience and keep going. Trust, being responsive rather than reactive, trust. These are elements that I talk about, and a number of others in the book, as sort of foundational pieces for us to have in our lives. Because people say to me, oh, is this for business, is this for personal life? It's for everything. It's for everything. Because just what you gave as an example, that kind of aha, sometimes there's nothing to have a big aha about. There's, life is clipping along. It's, wait, I haven't heard from my intuition in a while. It's not like that. It's you in there. It's just that your brain is fast and capable and broad, and who knows where it's reaching into the universe, or could reach into the universe. This is not for me to speculate here. But the point is that the more that we explore that, because, in the end, all we can do is live with what we're doing, change it, or basically get out of the room, so to speak. Because those are really the only three things. That's whether you're a solopreneur in your personal life, if you're working for a corporation, it's the same thing. If something's not working and you keep beating your head against a wall and you're not figuring it out, you need resources. You need to be able to turn to people who can help you with it sometimes, but you also need to have that fertile territory within yourself so that you know what to do with that information, how to best apply it for yourself. See what your tolerances are for risk and loss, and work within those, within that framework. I know a guy. He was basically a VAR uh, retailer. Well, he was a value added retailer, is what he was, and he had his own business. He was just one person, and what did he do? You would think, oh, this is success. This is major success. He got so many contracts and he blew them because he couldn't provide on those contracts. He overextended himself. He had somebody in, I think, Malaysia, that was providing some of the different types of items that he was selling. He was selling various things. He actually ended up flying out to Malaysia to help this guy pack some of it. That man ended up with a heart attack. Now, this is not a successful business. And if you were investing in this business and thinking of how to move forward with that, you'd be investing kind of on a little bit of air here. He ended up satisfying as many contracts as he could, and then he had to cut others loose, and he was just darn lucky not to be sued because of all of this, because the others were relying on what he was going to be sending to them. And he ended up shutting his business. And I said, I should have met you sooner. I said, well, and at this point, he really could not recoup because he was too big a hole with all of it, and was lucky to just, get as much of the resources that he had together, and walk away from everything. And that's what you hope not to have to do, because you're not doing it right.
Yeah, so let's go into that. That was a sound to me like an actual client that you worked with, that someone who had started a business and then took on way too much and then had to make the decisions to work themselves out. Is that almost like a little case study?
Well, in a sense, it is. I unfortunately, we were just discussing his his leaving the business because he'd already messed it up enough. Honestly, short of getting somebody else in with him to help to help at that point in time, somebody to work with him, somebody to, he would have needed more kind of, I want to say, I don't know if infrastructure is the word, but he needed more of that support if he was going to try to, I just don't think he could have done it at that point. He came to me a little bit too late. But I will tell you about another case story. And this is interesting because often what I'm doing is assisting. For example, I'll talk to groups sometimes and I'll be assisting in areas. Negotiation is a big thing. Communication is one that generally larger groups are interested in hearing how to, work sort of, I want to say unilaterally, up the ladder, down the ladder, and sideways. And I talk about stuff like that. Well, this client came to me, and the good news was it was a family business. It wasn't just one person. Well, it was one person who essentially owned it, and then she had her children sort of, around her to. I mean, they weren't her minion. They were kind of they were trying to run this as a business, but the bad news is they were a family. It's the good news and the bad news. And so they had challenges in doing so. So they also needed, they had, in their case, they had vision. They had vision and ideas, but they needed to ground all of that. They did need to get some support. They needed to, to figure out where their boundaries could, and in a way, it's similar to this man, but earlier and not quite so bad. They were thinking of opening another location. This woman who essentially owned this business herself, but it was a little bit too much of a bite to chew at that point in time, and some restraint was needed. And there were specific issues and challenges that they had that were, in this case, more part of the fact that they were a family. I mean, it was a very interesting. I'd never worked in that kind of context where you're trying to kind of rein in a family they're the appendages of the one owner is what they kind of were. So I don't even know what you call that. Is that a solopreneur or not? I don't know what that is in that case, but that's what we had to do. We had to bring it down to earth. And see, here's the interesting thing: when you're using your intuitive process, it doesn't mean it has to be irrational. Sometimes the greatest spontaneous insights come. I'm going to give you a crazy little story just for amusement here. That happened to me. Years ago, when I was but a child, I was involved in the performing industry. And I was working on a series. It was 6 episodes of a pilot series, and doing, it was a small thing. I was standing in for one of the characters for lighting, and I was also sort of, there was an office environment. I don't know if you remember Moonlighting. Do you ever remember that series Moonlighting with
Yeah.
Bruce Willis and
Yeah.
and Miss Shepherd? Yeah, it was kind of that sort of thing where you had all these office workers, and you were hoping that if it continued longer, you'd get foregrounded as well and have some. So I was just, small potatoes here on it, but I was working on this, and there were 3 different directors, and this was in the era when all of this kind of stuff had fairly free reign. There's been a lot of publicity of abuse of position and misconduct and stuff in the news in recent years. But at that point in time, there was really no recourse. There were 3 directors. One of them comes up to me. It's the first day I'm there, and he looks at me and he goes, "So, you married? Okay, how do you take that? What do you do with it?" I mean, I'm serious. What would you do with that one? So,
So
you
how old were
married?
you?
No, hi. Um, oh, I don't know, maybe about, how old was I? 27? No, no. Yeah, 27 or so, 27, 28. Um, and actually just recently married. So yes, I was married. But he didn't say hello. He didn't say welcome to the set. He said, "So, you married?" And I'm sitting now, once again, my brain, this shows you how I've been doing this all along in a variety of different ways. So I'm thinking, there's no good answer here. I say I'm married, then that sounds like some kind of tacit rejection of him. Maybe he wants me to be, one of his apprentices, and he's only looking for people who have more free time. I don't know. I'm not trying to project what his issue is, but I had a suspicion as to what he was really going for here. Doesn't matter. There was nothing conclusive. He just asked if I was married. So saying I was married would just be a rejection. Now, if I said I wasn't, now that could potentially open the door to other problems. And I've actually used this example in a couple of my workshops, and nobody came up with the one that I came up with. It just came into my head, and I looked very sad and sort of said, "Well, it's really worse than that. I'm in love." Now, this guy, you should have seen his face, because this is like this jaded guy from Hollywood who's out in New York and he's doing this thing. And he kind of looks at me, and that's exactly kind of, and then he mouthed, she's in love. Like I couldn't even hear the words, but he just said she's in love. Like I had told him I have hip dysplasia in response to him asking if I was married. Like it was a complete non sequitur and some kind of illness, perhaps. And he just kind of like, just sort of nodded and walked off. But see, here was the beauty of it. I didn't get fired. I stayed on the job. He ended up having a little protege who was following him around by the next day, right? So wonderful. Everybody ends happy. I just didn't want to get off on a really wrong foot with him in a way that would be somehow he'd be. I didn't know the man. I didn't know how he was going to respond to any of this. But you see, it was the craziest thing that came into my head, because he wasn't going to mess with love. What's he going to do with that one? I mean, what's he going to say about that? Because this was not a conversation, and now he's hearing about how I'm in love. This is a man at confronting me with, "Am I married?" So there was nowhere, no discussion to go into from this. So this is a silly example, but of one where sometimes having that active subjectivity that you are very in touch with. Now, it's not always going to save you in any instance, but that's a kind of a silly example. But on the other hand, very appropriate in the sense that I'm in business for myself here. I'm an actress. I don't have all this power here, and I'm a little person doing this little job, right? And getting some money for doing it, and for providing this acting service. And here's this guy. It's a kind of a skewed situation. And this is another thing that when I do these events, and I'm discussing stuff like negotiation and relationship and communication. There's a reason win-win is a good idea. There's a reason win-win is a good idea, because if you're you got somebody's arm behind their back on a situation, well, either they'll never work with you again, and in the worst case scenario may even mess up whatever this deal is, whether it's a financial deal, whether it's a service deal, whatever it is. You cannot, if you're working in partnership or whatever, it's got to end up being a win-win situation. I remember doing a negotiation once, and this was of course as an older adult. I was working for an airline at the time. I did a negotiation, and the guy who I was negotiating with, I mean, he was we're going to do it my way, and this is how it's going to go kind of guy. He didn't say that, but there was no negotiating. There was just no negotiating. He wants it his way. And I was known, believe it or not, as a tough negotiator. And that's because I knew where my boundaries were. I knew I had 6 risk factors I had to protect, and I couldn't give away the whole show. I was perfectly happy. We had a good service. We had a good service at a good price point. I felt there was a lot of integrity in what was being done. I felt very happy to be able to represent the company in this way in these circumstances, but I was not going to put them in a situation of tremendous risk over something that was a kind of a one-off deal. The high risk, the high yield only speaks to when there could be a lot realized out of it. Then you're willing to take greater risks. It's the same thing with finance. If you have the tolerance for a greater risk, then you can go for it. If there's a potential for a lot more to come out of all of this, if not, and in fact, that's the thing. You have to look at your risk tolerances. I've said that before, but I'm saying it again, and be comfortable with what is going on there. So anyway, this is an example of where we didn't make the deal. And I believe I talk somewhat about it in my book. We didn't make the deal. Sometimes you don't want to make the deal. You don't want to take the choice. There was a guy, he's a public figure. I'm not going to mention him because he's a very controversial public figure, but he works very heavily intuitively. He's not a likable man to many people, but he works very heavily intuitively. It's worked for him. He has succeeded in what he's tried to do. He's gotten where he needs to go. And people think if you're working intuitively, it has to be purely spiritual and metaphysical. Well, it can be taken that way, and it can go in those directions. Of course, I have my own, belief system, if you will, but it has nothing to do with the work that I'm talking about in this context, because I believe we're wired for this kind of connection and awareness. I think our brain picks all sorts of stuff up, and it processes it a lot faster than we know. And maybe someday we'll figure out how and why it does that. And who knows what other communication it can pick up. I'm not here to say. I'm not here to suggest limits, and I'm not here to to kind of diagnose the brain, if you will. But it's important to know you have a really strong ally up there, stronger than most people realize.
That's interesting. That the whispers, the intuition, the trust, the different things. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. We're going to make a transition to the money questions that I always like to ask people, but I want to ask this question first. So, what do people come to you for? So, do people come to you? What are the different things that people come to you and say, "All right, Danute, you're my person. I want you to help me with this." What are the things that people come to you for?
Well, a variety of things. For example, it's a range of things. I was contacted by a municipal sort of adjunct organization in a state. Their people, their financial services officers, were up for a communications seminar, a workshop. I did a workshop for 165 communication officers. Now, granted, they are all government employees, but they're also each their own little business, if you will. They have their little domain. They have their parameters of what they can work with or not, and then they have to go with that. And they told me, the people running the organization, what some of the big challenges and issues were. Now, I don't remember them all offhand now, but I basically tailored the workshop to those issues and imbued it with some of this subjectivity. Because depending on what audience you're talking to, people do understand we all have an internal life. We all have an internal, we perceive that. We come to a meeting and you can see, is the room small? Do people look mad? Are they going to serve food? Does it look like someone's break? You have all these different perceptions, sight, sound, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and here, the communications issue was a very big one. So I'm often brought in for communications, I'm often brought in for negotiations. And depending on where the group is coming from, I offer them an approach, sometimes a facilitation. I can also, tailor it down to specifics. One woman came to me, and she was in a finance group. She was running a finance group. And she said, they're not thinking outside the box. I'm a creative thinker. Yes, we have certain bottom lines, but we have to provide for opportunities. And they're just like boom, boom, boom. They reject people they don't need to reject, et cetera, et cetera. So what can we do? Well, because this was just one, she didn't have a big, a budget for like training and classes and whatnot. She asked me what was my best idea that I could offer. And I said, well, they're in the box. Let's move the box. And that's what we did. We moved their understanding of what the box was. And that took a little bit of effort because we needed to know what they think they're doing. Now that we're going to have them do what they think, they're still going to be working in their box, but we're giving them a bigger box to work with. And she hadn't thought of doing something like that. So you see, things like that, it just varies. Now, individually, it varies very, very broadly. I had one client for 5 years, not the kind of client I'm actually looking for necessarily, but she had many, many challenges. I bring her up in the book as well. She had many challenges. She was in a bad relationship. She wasn't employed at the time. She was trying to do some contract work, but she didn't have a BA. And, it goes on and on. And I'm sitting here thinking, I mean, I wanted to help her, but was my reaction to this initially. And she knows this. After working together 5 years intermittently, it's not like I don't like to addict people. I'm not trying to addict people to coming to me to have to talk about everything. It depends. She undertook her own process of education, of attending workshops, of attending seminars, of doing, work on herself. And then here and there, we would address specific issues. We would look at what the challenges were, what the opportunities were, what the potential fallout would be, and what she was comfortable doing. And I try never to tell anybody what they need to do. What I do offer is ideas on, well, if you want to achieve this, if you want to go swimming, unfortunately, you will have to get wet. You cannot swim in water and not be wet unless they come up with bubbles of some kind that we can all sit in, but then that's not swimming. So that's the sort of thing. It's a range, and I always target it specifically, and that's why it's interesting because it's not a platform. I can work with someone's platform. I did that exactly once where someone had a platform and an approach, and I came in to work on how they could best maximize the value of the approach that this person was presenting in the platform that he was offering. And that's when we got into a lot more of this subjectivity and very specific things that they could be doing, which there's no time or opportunity to talk about here. So that's some of the work.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. I'm sure that someone else was thinking, okay, what does someone come to you for? And that's
Mhm.
exactly what I was trying to get. So thank you for sharing that. And we'll get to how people can get to you and how they can find you here in a little bit. But this is a podcast about money. And I have three questions I ask every one of my guests about money. And everybody's answers are different. So the first question I ask everybody is what's the smartest thing you've ever done regarding money? And tell me that story.
Well, I don't know that there is one thing that I did with regard to money that I can say, okay, this was the one big success piece. I have actually talked to people at different times about financial guidance because that's not that is actually not my expertise. The specific guidance regarding, because that's another thing that's great to know about being a decision strategist, is that what you don't know, you need to find out. Now, in my own life, I wasn't always a decision strategist. I was working in other contexts for other people. So the biggest thing I did, and again, it gets a little repetitious, but it's a slightly different twist. I invested in myself. I invested in myself, in the knowledge, in the training. And again, this goes to whether people do that through various seminars that they do, whether they reach out to people such as yourself, whether you need to learn, you need to acquire, because it's true, you do need to learn some things from outside. You're not going to get all of this intuitively. What's going to work intuitively is how you then put that mix together. Like this one guy that I said that his intuition worked so well for him. What he did is he said, I don't care how good it looks on paper. I don't care. If it does not feel right, I just don't do it. And I go even further. If someone else makes a bundle off of that deal, then okay, good for him. It worked for him. I know it wouldn't work for me. And that's because, again, he's not a young man. He's been doing this for a long time. And of course, he takes what's down on paper. We need information. We do. I'm not trying to suggest that anything from the outside is suspect. We do need it, but then we need to know how to work with it, and we can only do that by that investment in ourselves. So your financial investment and what you can build and how you can grow it and how dynamically you can do that has to come from in here first, because that's how you could utilize the one guy that I told you I worked on his platform. He said the biggest problem was he was teaching people things, but then the implementation wasn't there in the way that it really needed to be to even show the value of what he's training. And it was interesting that he honestly said that. He said he really needed some support in that respect. And that's what we dealt with. So the investment, the best investment, because some people can make money left, right, and center. I had a consultation once for an entrepreneur. Interestingly enough, money was not his biggest issue. We were talking about other things within his life. He said, I can always make money. I can always pick up money. I can always get investors. And see, he had the confidence, the raw confidence of that, but it was built also on the knowledge that he had within this area. People have to invest in something, and he was presenting opportunities for investment. And generally, they played out beautifully. But he was one of those people who came in. He was the entrepreneur. He got it all going. He sold it off, and then he went somewhere else with it, and started again, and never feared. He was fearless in that. I listened to him, and I thought, oh my goodness, there's a training, there's a teaching for all of us. But he wasn't just doing this on whim and fancy. He wasn't just a gambler, just a risk taker, because some risks do need to be taken. I'm sorry, nothing different will ever happen in your life if you don't take a mini risk in some direction, even if it's having oatmeal rather than toast in the morning. It's you have to make little shifts and changes, and this guy was dynamic. So learning from people like that and seeing even as somebody in my own work, there's always insight to be gained from others who are doing something different, but in such a way. I couldn't picture myself being that kind of an entrepreneur. But that's something that he taught me. He said, oh, yes, if you have confidence in yourself, you know what you're doing, you know what you're talking about, you'll get there. You'll find the people, you'll get the money, you'll build it, it'll happen. And I loved that. Yes. So those are bits and bobs of education.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So the best thing you've ever done regarding money is invest in yourself, and education is what you've done,
And getting the knowledge.
which is huge because then you can put that knowledge to work. And to piggyback a little on one of your stories there was to take action, because people need to take action to get things done. It's one of the most important pieces of the puzzle.
Absolutely.
So how about the other side? What's the biggest money mistake you've ever made, and what is that story?
Well, I have money mistake. I guess it goes back to what I was saying a little bit at the beginning of my other answer, was that I've tried not to make mistakes, and maybe that's a mistake, because I have enjoyed and appreciated the opportunities that I've had here and there. It's not like I'm sitting inside of, offices all the time or constantly in a seminar on finance, but at times I have turned to the people who do have the insights and the knowledge and the training to offer. And so it's kept me from making any huge mistakes. Now, the other thing about this, and I think it's important to mention in general, is when you're a solopreneur, and it speaks to some of the other stories I told about people getting beyond what they really can do. It's important to know what it is you do want to do as a solopreneur, what you want to accomplish here, what you hope to accomplish, and what you really don't want to do. If you're not here to make that kind of fortune, if you're not here to scale up to whatever heights, then that has to be understood as well. And you still need to know how to keep things moving, how to keep them going. There's still growth involved. There's still maybe other dynamics of shifting, of changing, and that's another thing I talk about in the book as well. The times where you need to kind of let something go. You just let something go and move in a different direction and perhaps take on a partner, perhaps take on other investments you wouldn't normally do, but you need to risk a little bit and you need to you need to give that a try. Uh, you know, these are the kinds of things that people like that can teach. And I think that's really, maybe the worst thing is that I haven't just done it myself and been able to say, well, I walked out there, I did it all myself, and that was it. Maybe I haven't taken enough risks, but I feel comfortable. So ultimately, I guess I don't feel that that's been a problem. And that's what you have to do. You have to be comfortable with what it is, comfortable with the loss, comfortable with the gain, comfortable with the management of it all, and understand where your entrepreneurship begins and ends, and where management has to kick in. So
So, how about the last question I ask everybody, and that is, what does mastering your finances mean to you?
mastering finances is about a couple things: power and resilience. Power and resilience. So, mastering your finances means giving yourself the kind of opportunities that you need to have in order to accomplish the work that you want to accomplish, but also the fun. Because life has got to be about that too. We can't all just be about money and work, because otherwise we'll die on the vine. So that's what you need. You need to work within a direction for yourself that gives you the kind of power you need. Because, see, again, all of this really boils down to power. Subjectivity is power, objectivity, what the knowledge that it all builds to power. And that power builds resilience. See, because if you do not have the resilience, the sense of resilience, you won't be able to take the risks, and you won't be able to learn more, achieve more, gain more, build more. And more is relative, as I've already said. It's very relative. But 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 that's where the excitement can be. If you can get yourself into a position where you can really play with it. And there are people, I've listened to financial people who can play with it. And it's always fantastic to hear that.
I love it. Power and resilience. I haven't heard that one yet on my podcast. I love that. Power and I'm going to translate that just a little bit. Power to choose
Yes.
and then resilience to see it through.
To see it through. And if it doesn't work exactly, you don't get crushed by it. You learn from it, or you let it go and you move on. I mean, if you read any of the books on folks who have achieved a great deal in their lives, financially and in terms of building their businesses and in the exploration, you realize that there are times, you're not everything's going to be a win, but sometimes a loss is not the worst thing that can happen, because you will get something out of it that will help catapult you somewhere else. And that's the mindset that you really need to have. And that is part of the power that we're talking about.
I love it. Absolutely love it. So, how can my listeners find you?
How can they find me? Well, I'm taking my own advice and I'm making some shifts and changes. I do have a website. It's www.celefontus. It's spelled Celaphontus. Celefontus.com. And they can find me there. I also have an author website, which is just my name, Danute Debney Shaw .net, and I can be found there as well. I'm going to actually be migrating my work over to my author website. There are going to be two other books coming out besides Tin Man, and I'm going to take this opportunity to show you. Can you see? Oh, but it's reversed. Are you seeing it reversed, or am I just seeing
Oh,
it?
no, I can see it perfectly.
Oh, good, because it's reversed here. So that's my book, How the Tin Man Found His Brain. You can see the spelling of my name underneath it. One Attorney's Path for Perceptual Awareness. Bearing in mind, this is a collection of essays and commentaries. It's not a boilerplate how to, but I bring up a lot of the stuff we talked about today and much more. And I offer more examples and I offer more sort of exercises to consider, things to think about is what I call it. And so my author website has more information about that. I also have two more books I'm going to have coming out in that vein. But before I do that, my grandmother's story is really calling me. My family and their amazing dynamics. She sort of started out in a Downton Abbey context, went through the Russian Revolution, the First World War, the Second World War in Europe, ended up in Siberia, came to the United States, and there are all sorts of adventures there. Her story needs to be told, and I think can be done in a very fun way that would make a lot of other fun and insightful, so that other people can possibly learn a lot more about resilience in a very practical way. So I'm going to do her story. My work is going to be turning in that direction, more writing, more speaking. I will still be doing consulting. Absolutely. If people want to reach out to me, they can reach out to me on those two websites. I'm also on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on what's the other Instagram as well with Silafantis. And as I say, Silafantis as a company will not go away. That's going to kind of be my little home, but it's going to be more about my name, my work, and more about this writing. And I look forward to seeing people, and drop me a line and tell me what you think.
That'd be great. That would be great. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we let you go?
Well, I'd like to thank you again for inviting me. And I think if I have anything to say to folk out there is don't be afraid to learn more. Don't be afraid to explore more, at least in the exploration phase. I'm not saying you have to put everything on the line with it, but don't be afraid of that, because ultimately the discernment that you develop, right? The self-trust and the discernment that you develop is going to be worth its weight in gold and worth its weight in your solopreneurship and your success as a solopreneur. And I wish you all the very, very best in your endeavors.
Thank you very much for being on Solopreneur Money Podcast, Danute.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Well, Solopreneurs, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Danute Debney Shaw. For all of her contact information, her bio, everything is all in the show notes. And what I'll finish with is my 3 takeaways that I gathered from that fantastic conversation. 1, trust the whispers. I call them whispers. You could call it intuition, the voices, whatever it want to be that you want to call them. I call them the whispers. Number 2, test it out. And you don't have to test it out, with big monster risks, but test it out daily. Start to build that muscle of really trusting the whispers. And then the next thing is the third takeaway is to stay resilient and continuously keep working at trusting the whispers, testing it out. And when you get stuck, reach out to someone for help and have them help you get over that hurdle to go on to the next step. So I really appreciate you listening. Please, please, please share this podcast with a friend and help this thing grow. I truly appreciate all the help you're giving us and your ears. Have a fantastic day.